At 0615 local time, a Shark D reconnaissance drone lifts off outside Novorevka and banks toward the Highway of Death. 130 kilometers an hour, 4 hours of fuel in the tank, a 30-power camera already crawling over the road for a Russian resupply column grinding west at 56 an hour. The crew calls themselves the Hunters. They don't know they've already been marked. Between that column and the 8 FPV drones circling to kill it stand 5 layers of modern air defense. Passive sensors, a jammer, a surface-to-air missile battery, and an interceptor that fires nets and lasers. Systems like these have swatted more than 550 Ukrainian drones out of the sky. Today, every one of them fails, and each fails for its own specific reason, not one by one, all at once. The math starts against the Russians. An FPV drone here costs a few $100s. A frame, 4 motors, a battery, a warhead scavenged off an RPG. The missile a Tor M2 fires to swat it costs about $800,000. That's the price of throwing a luxury car at every bicycle that rolls past and praying you never run out of luxury cars. Even Ukraine's most expensive FPVs top out near $30,000, so the attackers aren't betting they can outshoot a wall that has already downed 550 drones. They're betting 5 perfect layers can be made to trip over each other, and that the column, by packing its protection tight, has turned itself into the most concentrated target on the road. The first layer never transmits a thing. It's a svet-ku, the RB636 electronic intelligence complex, and it sweeps the entire radio band from 25 megahertz to 18 gigahertz, listening. It doesn't jam, doesn't ping, doesn't announce itself. It measures the instant a signal reaches 3 antennas spread kilometers apart, compares the fractions of a microsecond between them, and draws the crossing lines back to the source. Time difference of arrival, TDOA, 3 microphones pinning down a single whisper purely by the order the sound arrives at each one. It's the reason a launch team can catch a Lancet through the window minutes after keying a radio. Every time the Shark D talks to its crew, it hands the svet-ku another fix, tightening the box around the launch site. But the Shark isn't talking the way that math needs. It hops across 128 frequencies a second, speaks in bursts of 0.3 of a second, then goes silent for 33. It's a conversation that switches to a different language every third of a second and cuts out mid-word. Each burst is too short to triangulate, each silence too long to hold a track. The suspected area swells and shrinks and never closes to a point. You can't jam a sensor that only listens. There's no signal of its own to drown. The only way to beat the svet-ku is to give it nothing to hear. So the crew does exactly that. The second layer is airborne and almost silent. A Super Cam S350, a 15-kilogram flying wing with an electric motor you can't hear over the wind, carves a lazy oval overhead. Its electro-optical and infrared balls zooming to 40 power, hunting heat and shape against cold ground. Range around 240 kilometers, 4.5 hours aloft. It doesn't need to hear the crew. It needs to see the warm rectangle of a battery pack, the human silhouette that reads wrong for a field at dawn. So the team goes dark in the fullest sense. Transmitter off, radios off, battery packs pulled from the drones and folded into thermal blankets that bleed their heat down into the temperature of the dirt. A campfire smothered until the camera reads only cold ash. Absolute emissions control, no radio, no warmth, no motion. For a few minutes, the launch site simply isn't there. But a blind crew is a useless crew and the picture still has to move. That's where the Shark D earns its second job. It isn't only a scout, it's a relay, throwing the targeting feed back in one-way squirts, a single narrow beam that talks and never answers. The S350 sweeps its oval and finds cooling dirt where a team should be. It has cut the crew's eyes for a moment, but the data is already gone, riding a beam it never sees. Now the loudest layer. A GTEL R330ZH rides a Chemaz chassis, 4 phased array antennas raised like a steel fan, and it doesn't listen. It screams across 100 megahertz to 2 gigahertz, drowning GPS and GLONASS out to 25 kilometers on the ground and 50 in the air. And it doesn't just delete the satellite signal, it forges one. The FPVs read a clean, confident position, the icon sliding smoothly down the correct road on screen, while the real drone is being walked sideways toward a tree line. The map says go straight, the ground says you're flying into a wall, and the display looks perfectly normal the whole way in, so the pilots throw the satellites away. They kill GPS outright and fly on their own eyes. The landmarks scrolling under the nose, a slag heap, a run of power lines, the exact bend where the highway kinks left. Optical navigation can't be spoofed by a radio because there's no radio left in the loop to lie to, and the Jetel carries a fatal habit. To shout that loud across that much spectrum, it has to pour out enormous power, which makes it, of everything on that road, the easiest thing in the world to find. The loudest guard in the room is the one you locate first in the dark. 2 surviving FPVs already have its bearing. The 4th layer was built to end this outright. A Tor M2, NATO calls it the SA-15 Gauntlet, 16-9 M338 missiles standing vertical in the launcher, radar that picks up a target at 32 kilometers and tracks 48 of them at once, reaching out to roughly 12 to 16. And because it was designed for exactly this kind of electronic knife fight, it can drop its radar and track optically, passively, when the air is thick with jamming. Against 8 small drones, it should be plenty, so the crew hands it a target it can't refuse. 1 FPV, a decoy, and climbs deliberately out of the ground clutter and switches its GPS back on, lighting itself up like a flare. The Tor's radar snaps onto the clean, obedient contact. The launcher slews, and a 9M338 leaves the tube at several times the speed of sound to erase a drone that cost a few $100s. It's an $800,000 answer to a decoy, the luxury car spent on the wrong bicycle. And while the missile chases the flare climbing into open sky, the 2 real FPVs are somewhere else entirely, skimming a meter off the dirt where no radar horizon can hold them, closing on the column. The system did precisely what it was built to do. It was pointed at the wrong drone. The last layer doesn't fire missiles, it hunts with light. A murom-p electro-optical station, rare and costly, can resolve a human being at 10 kilometers, and it feeds its marks to an interceptor drone carrying no warhead at all, just a net and a laser. The laser strikes first, burning into the center of an FPV's camera to blind it. The interceptor closes to tangle the rotors in mesh, or simply ram. The lead FPV takes the laser across its lens and goes half blind, and rolls with it. The pilot cuts power to the motors on one side, sliding the drone bodily out of the beam, then drops it into a drainage ditch and flies the ditch itself, using the dust the convoy kicked up and the Russian trucks as a moving wall. The bodyguards become the cover the killer hides behind. There are 8 drones in the air now, and 1 interceptor, 1 laser, 1 set of engagement channels, and 8 is more than those channels can hold. 1 FPV rises out of the dust at the ammunition truck and drives its shaped charge into the base of the cargo bed. The warhead cooks off the shells stacked inside. The secondary detonation walks down the column into a fuel tanker, and the tanker takes a BMP with it. The most protected vehicle on the road becomes the brightest fire on it. Every one of those 5 layers works. Not one was beaten by being outgunned. The svet-ku can find any radio that stays on too long. The S350 can see any heat that forgets to hide. The Jetel can bend any signal that trusts a satellite. The Tor M2 can kill anything its radar can hold. The murom-p can spot a man at 10 kilometers. Each is a link in a chain, and a layered defense is a relay race. Every runner buys the seconds the next one needs to be ready. The whole design assumes the layers take turns. The ambush never let them take turns. Dragged into the open, forced to answer a passive sensor, a silent camera, a jammer, a missile, and a swarm inside the same handful of minutes each layer had to spend itself before the next was set. Russia's defenses didn't fail one by one. They were forced to fail all at once. The relay only works if someone's there to take the baton, and every runner was already running. Depth is the whole Russian doctrine. Sensor behind jammer, behind missile, behind gun, each covering the seam in front of it. But depth is a promise about time. Every layer assumes it gets its own few seconds, its own clean piece of sky, its own turn to fire before the threat reaches the next man. In the open, moving at 56 kilometers an hour with no terrain to stretch the engagement out, the column had no time to hand out. 5 layers collapsed into one overloaded instant. And none of this stays on one road. Every resupply run that packs its protection tight for safety is building the same trap for itself, concentrating 5 single points of failure into one target a swarm can overload. The more layers you stack in the same small square of ground, the more of them a saturating attack forces to fall together. So which layer do you think was Russia's fatal mistake? The jammer that gave away its own position, the Tor M2 that spent an $800,000 missile on a decoy, or the passive sensor there was no way to silence? Tell me in the comments. If breakdowns like this are what you came for, subscribe and hit like. It's the difference between the next one reaching you or not.